thank you for joining us again tonight for our FASD Awareness webinar. We're delighted to invite back a regular favourite, Maggie May. Maggie May, today we're going to be focusing on talking to the expert. And there is no greater expert with understanding what it's like to live with FASD than a young woman in her late 20s with a diagnosis of FASD, and also one of the great advocates of FASD around the world, supporting individuals and families and educating the wider public about what it is like to live alongside FASD. So we're going to crack straight on with a question that we had from Jocelyn that was sent to us previously. And it was covering the subject of you understanding your FASD, at what stage in your life you understood it. And the other part of the question was, how do you not blame your mother? I think this is a really important topic to cover. And I know you've discussed this on a number of occasions with people. So can you dive into that question for us, please, Maggie May?
Yeah. So I got my diagnosis, as some of you know, when I was about 5, but wasn't told until I was 14. Previous to my FASD diagnosis, I had been given a diagnosis of ADHD first. And so at least half of my classroom had ADHD, which was just ironic. So when I got told I had FASD, I was like, oh, well, everyone has ADHD, so everyone has FASD, no big deal, just more letters. And because I'd had my diagnosis when I was so much younger, supports had already been put in place in the background. So I really was not aware of, my kind of challenges, because they were already being dealt with before they became a huge problem. But it wasn't until I was in my late teens, I'm going to say 16, 17, where it really I began to realize, oh, I can't drive, or why am I struggling so much with algebra when it just seems the rest of my class could get it so quickly and I just could not grasp it. So for me, that's where I began to realize, okay, it's not just like everyone has it. But my kind of understanding of, I'll be fine. It'll be fine. It's not going to affect me. And then I'm going to say when I was about 18, 19, and my friends were going to university, they were moving out, they were getting into relationships, they were getting jobs. And I was nowhere near at that stage in my development or maturity. That's when I began to understand of, oh, okay, this isn't going away. And actually this does affect me. And my life falls apart when my scaffolding disappears, where everything that could go wrong would go wrong. And that's when, I guess for me, I began to put in my own scaffolding, because I began to get anxiety of, well, what if my parents aren't there? Or what if I go on holiday and everything goes wrong? What am I going to do? But I started to understand that actually things like my anxiety wasn't just, it was another comorbid of my FASD. My ADHD was a comorbid of my FASD. It was all these that I'd never really put together before of, oh, the reason I have anxiety is, oh, it's due to having FASD. It's another condition from it. But then I began to do a lot of research. I began to finally talk to other people with FASD, and I grew a very, I guess, insightful understanding of life is going to be okay. There's always going to be supports, whether you create them yourselves, you go to organizations, you get help from people abroad, which is what I've done. You can build your own supports. It's not the end of the world. I remember I first thought it was the end of the world, and then I realized it's not. Yes, I'm going to have challenges, but I also have huge strengths that I really rely on. And every time I make a mistake, or, my life goes downwards, I'm like, okay, well, I've learned from this one. Clearly I need more support in this area, so I'm going to go and look into that. when it comes to not blaming my mom, for me, it never even entered my mind that I should be blaming someone. When I was told, my foster mom at the time, she explained it in such a way of, Maggie, you know what it's like to have a mosquito bite, and it's really itchy, but everyone tells you do not scratch it because it'll get worse, it'll get infected. But we all end up itching the mosquito bite because we just cannot resist. That's what it was like for your mom when it came to alcohol. And when she explained it like this, it was like, you're right. If I can't resist scratching a mosquito bite, even though I know it's going to make things worse, then I can't blame my mom. If anything, I'm the biggest advocate for my mom because she didn't know. There was no research done in Ireland at the time that drinking and pregnancy could cause FASD. She was addicted to alcohol, but so was the rest of her support network, or the rest of her family. So she never had a chance of even trying to go through sober. Everyone had given up on her, so she kind of had just given up on herself. I remember I talked to her, and she was just like, "I didn't know. I'm really sorry." I'm like, "I don't blame you. If anything, I'm sorry that you were let down and that you have to feel this guilt, because it's not your fault." And I think,
with your connections with the wider community of FASD, international connections now, but we know you talk with a lot of other advocates that have FASD. You're connected with a large network of people that you discuss FASD diagnosis, don't you? And we've got a question came in here which was saying, how come you don't get angry about it? Do you know of others that do get angry or have been angry? And what advice do you give them? Because I know we do the friendship groups, and you also attend the support groups that we run, but it's a subject that comes up quite often. Can you delve into that one a
yeah,
bit?
it's completely normal to get angry. I think everyone goes through a period of grief and loss. They go through grief of, I'm never going to not have challenges, or I might not ever be able to drive a car. And you have a loss of, you're never going to be this perfect child who doesn't have challenges. Both sides have it. Parents go through the grief and loss, but so do individuals who have FASD, and we get angry. I know individuals who are angry and they're just stuck in this place. And it doesn't do you any good. I'm a huge advocate of, yeah, get angry, go through grief and loss, mourn your loss, but then find the bright side of it. Find something to push you through that anger stage, because when you stay in this angry at the world, at your mom, it doesn't benefit you, and in fact, it uses so much more energy. I know for me, I am exhausted trying to hold grudges or trying to stay angry at someone, because I need that energy to be able to remember to shower in the morning, or to actually be able to remember to go eat. So I need that energy for more useful things than just being angry. But I
And
will say it's normal.
you've used that experience to become an advocate, and you've spoken, as I said, with lots of researchers. You work alongside a lot of researchers that ask you questions, and we know a lot of teams up and down the country and abroad as well that are academics that are looking to try and understand better, and there's no better way than talking to someone like yourself. So what would your recommendation be? Let's say there are other families here where you've got a young adult with FASD that has struggled with understanding their diagnosis, that wants to become an advocate and get on board with that. What would you recommend?
For me, I went and I joined an online FASD group called Flying with Broken Wings, and there was parents, there's people with FASD, there's lawmakers, there's pretty much any type of career people is in there. And I just started talking about what it was like for me. I started reading what other individuals with FASD went through. I began to realize it's not just a Maggie thing of, oh, I couldn't read until I was 14. That wasn't just a Maggie thing. It was, oh, that's a normal thing. Okay. Talk to other people with FASD, join virtual support groups, attend webinars, ask questions. Most people didn't like COVID. I absolutely loved COVID. Because so much became available of all of a sudden conferences were being put online, or webinars were being put online, or support groups were being put online. So if they hadn't been online, I wouldn't have access to them. So I did so much learning because all of a sudden there's all these educational webinars on FASD and brain domains, and where I could just learn. I could learn the scientific side of it, but I could also just learn things about myself. And me being at that point an advocate, I would butt in and be like, well, this is actually what it's like. This is what you think it's looking like, but actually this is what it's like. And I got to the point where I wasn't scared of offending people, of saying, actually, you're wrong. This is not what it's actually like living with it. This is what it's like. So don't be afraid to, if someone is saying something that isn't what it's like for you living it in real life, don't be afraid to say, actually, for me, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Because people need to hear that, and researchers, doctors, teachers, parents, anyone, they want to know that. They need to know that things, and everyone's different. So the more voices, the better.
And it, as we always say, it's such a vast spectrum. So it is so very different. There are similarities. There are certain traits and behaviors that we see that are common. You and I both met a long time ago when you were doing your YouTube videos, and you were working, and I was doing YouTube videos, and we spoke about how to market those. But even then, you had the inquiring mind. You wanted to educate people about what it was like living alongside FASD. I've got a question here from Jill saying, I'm a foster parent and my child has FASD, but I have 6 children with different disabilities, so we don't mention those differences. Do you think I'm doing the correct thing by not telling them? He is 14.
Everyone's different. I'm a huge advocate of normalizing things. In my household, if I have a meltdown, it's not a meltdown. Maggie's just having a moment. Or, because that way when I go out into I can advocate for myself of, look, when I get overwhelmed, this is what's going to happen. So you now know. But it's also normalizing the challenges of being confident that, hey, I have ADHD, I have dyslexia, I have an anxiety disorder. So, and especially when you're going for jobs and stuff, that sometimes you need to be confident saying, look, I know what I need. I know what my challenges are going to be. This is the support I need. But also not making a big deal out of it. These days, when I go to family get-togethers and stuff, and I have a meltdown, no one blinks an eye. They're just like, Maggie's just having a moment. Give her 5 minutes and she'll be fine again. It's not a big, oh, Maggie's having a meltdown. She's 28. She shouldn't be doing this. This is not okay behavior for a 20. It was just, no, Maggie's having one of her moments. Let her do what she needs to do. So it's just about normalizing things.
And that normalization, we often say, don't we, in our training as well, that when you normalize it as a child, it means, every child with FASD is going to become, hopefully, an adult with FASD.
Yeah.
And so therefore, those strategies, those coping mechanisms that you put in place early on, they really are that wraparound support for later, aren't they, in adult life? Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think the younger you can start advocating or understanding yourself, it's only beneficial for when you become an adult, of being able to do it without needing a support network. If your support network isn't available, that you can confidently say to a boss, to teachers, of, this is what my challenges are, this is the support I need. And instead of, sometimes people will not hear you, or they think they know best. You can be like, no, I know me and I know what my brain needs, and this is what I need. Yeah. Thank you, but this is what I need.
I've got a question here that I think is really, it's important. Do you think people with FASD have the right to know their diagnosis? I have an opinion on this, and I think you'd be sharing mine. Go on.
Yes. I guess I'm one of those people. I had both sides of the coin. I was very fortunate and got a diagnosis when I was very young, but I wasn't told until 14. which means I grew up thinking I was this terrible child. I would often be like, why did my foster parents want to foster me? I'm this awful child that when I have meltdowns, I hit below the belt. I don't know why I do it, but my brain just, I lose control. I used to think I was stupid. I used to think I was dumb. I used to think I was unteachable. I really just, I hated myself. And that's just because I didn't understand why I had all these challenges. I did not understand that it wasn't my fault, that when I became overwhelmed, I would have a meltdown because my brain was struggling. So I grew up thinking I was this horrible, awful, unlovable child. And that's just because I didn't know what was going on. When I finally got told at 14, it was like a weight got off my shoulder of, oh, it's not my fault. Okay, I'm not this awful child. This is why I struggle with mathematics or not being able to read. It's not because I'm stupid. It's just because my brain is taking a bit longer. So yes, I am a huge advocate of telling a child, but also I often get asked of when's the right time to tell someone. And when they start to notice, when they start coming home from school saying, look, or their grades are dropping and they're getting 1 out of 6 spellings correct, and they start to notice of, why am I not like everyone else? That's when you start explaining to them.
Can I ask you this, because it just occurred to me there will be quite a few people that might think, well, how do you approach the subject? How do you tell somebody, let's say it's a 14-year-old or around that sort of age group. Now, we're going to come on to dysmaturity a little bit later, so therefore we have to be quite understanding about how you approach the subject. How would you do it?
My mom was very smart. After she told me, we just looked at YouTube videos. And I remember there was one, Morgan Fawcett, and he just talked about what it was like for him. And I remember I burst into tears because I was like, that's me. He forgets to eat. He doesn't feel, wait, that's me. It was for the first time I was able to recognize my struggles or my challenge in somebody else and that it was okay. Up until this point, I thought I was the only one in the world who had FASD and who was going through this. So I remember we just watched YouTube videos. And there was a few books on FASD for kids, just explaining things in a very, very gentle manner. And it was because of that I was able to recognize things. And then it kind of made it, okay, I'm not the one out there. This isn't the end of the world. I'm not alone. And then when I got older, like I said, I joined an online group and I became even more self-aware and aware of things and began to really thrive in discovering, actually, I'm okay. I remember there was one question. I was like, my kid's always wearing their coat inside. It doesn't matter if it's 50 degrees inside or 80 degrees outside, they just will always wear their winter coat. And I was like, yeah, it's a safety thing. For them, that's their safety blanket. I do the exact same. The amount of battles I've had with my parents of, Maggie, take off your coat. And I'm like, nope. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to tell them, but doing it in a really delicate way. And you don't need to just bombard them with it. I think it's when they start to notice, and then let them recognize it themselves, of let them hear other people with FAT speak. Let them be like, oh, that sounds like me. Oh, she has challenge with this. So do I.
And because part of the complication as well is that you've got the comorbidities. So you might already have other diagnoses like autism, ADHD, the common ones that run alongside. And often you will have, or you could have, other disabilities or other problems with your heart, lungs, physical problems as well. So you might already be thinking, well, I've got these challenges, but it's only when you get that umbrella diagnosis of FASD that it kind of all ties in. Would you agree with that? Or would you, that doesn't really make any sense?
No, I think it does make sense. And it also opens up of, you might have autism and ADHD and FASD. So now all of a sudden you don't just belong to 2 groups of people, you belong to 3 groups, which just means you can have way more friends to chat with. And it also just opens different doors of things that maybe people of autism don't have, where people with FASD do have. It just means that you get more understanding of, okay, this is more my FASD than my autism.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The other question I've got here is from Karen. Would you say paranoia and lack of trust is a symptom of FASD? We have 4 adopted children, all with suspected FASD, and it's very challenging, particularly, I would imagine, with the paranoia. Now, you mentioned you have anxiety disorders, and that's related to FASD.
Yeah. I think it's very common. I do not trust people at all. And that's not to say like some big bad thing happened that made me distrust the world. I often put it down as it's a safety thing of when you have a disability, I was always bullied in school, so that didn't help. But when you have a disability, you already feel like you're a weakling, or you're going to get picked on, or you're the weaker one. So you protect yourself. And if that means pushing people away or never really trusting people, that's what we do. I am terrible for it. And that's actually I'm still working on, of just being like, everyone's not out to get me. Sometimes it might feel that way, but actually there's a bigger picture at play here, and I need to trust people, because it's exhausting always having to be on your guard and never really, you're doubting everyone and everything that's being said to you. So yeah, I think it's a normal thing. I go through it. And I think it's just it's also, I think, a lack of confidence, in my case, of myself, that I don't trust as well, because I'm like, well, maybe I'm wrong, or I don't remember it that way, so I think you're lying to me. And that's also to do with memory and other comorbidities that affect me. Trust is a huge thing, but once you've gained my trust, you have my trust for life, where I'm just going to trust you all the way. But also when you have FASD, it can go the other way, where we're way too trusting and we get taken advantage of, and we think everyone's our best friends, and everyone's, we do anything that person says because we trust them. So it's a really difficult line of, very often we're either on this side of it where we don't trust anyone, or on this side of it where we just trust everybody.
It brings me back a little bit. I'm just going to sort of touch on it again about diagnosis early on and understanding it. You and I are good friends with RJ Formanek. You've done a lot of work with RJ in America and Canada, and I know that he was saying that he didn't get his diagnosis until very late, and when he got that diagnosis, it made so much sense of his life and the trials and tribulations, and he explains that very eloquently on our interview with him on the webinar. So please do go and have a look at, dive into that. But that was so relevant to saying what we've just been saying as well. That's an adult who discovered that at 46, gone through massive trials and tribulations to that point. So it really does reinforce the importance of that and making sense of your behaviors. I've got a question here that came in earlier. We parents are having extreme challenges with our 5-year-old and violent behavior. Non-favorite requests are getting dressed, hair brushing, turning down music. They're all met with hitting, biting, and kicking. Have you noticed in your experiences ways to get non-exciting or unpleasant requests done and completed? And have you had challenges with this type of behavior? What do you think this might be expressed generally only to loved ones? Why do you think it's to loved ones? And would you like to get a new perspective, or they would like to get a new perspective on this? So, yeah, there's quite a lot there, isn't there, to wrap up?
That's a lot of things. So key things that are jumping out at me is it's dysmaturity. When you have FASD, you very often half the age that they actually are. So that is, a 5-year-old is actually functioning at maybe a 2-year-old, which those kind of behaviors would be normal for a 2-year-old. And that's a whole webinar in itself, because Andrew knows me very well that I will talk about dysmaturity until the cows come home, which I'm not going to do today. But also another thing that jumps out, it could be sensory. Things like brushing hair is sensory. Listening to music too loud is totally a sensory thing. My parents were always on to me about that.
Can you
So
explain that? What do you mean by sensory? How does that make you feel then? With the brushing of the hair, let's look at that for a start.
So I had, for some sensory issues, I had a very, very low tolerance. So a feeling of a brush being pulled through my hair, even though, there might not be knots and stuff, it was agony. It felt like every hair on my head was being pulled out, every strand. I could feel it all. It was sensory overload that would then cause me to go into meltdown because my hypersensitivity kicked in, and it was, I would feel things like when my hair got tied up into a ponytail, I could feel that elastic pulling every one of my strands into place. It was excruciating. Things like that, even the noise of a hairbrush going through my hair and on my scalp drove me insane. And I
How did you
couldn't
overcome that
explain it.
then?
We tried a lot of different brushes. In the end, my mom would just use her fingers as a brush. She'd put in a lot of like detanglers and lots of serums and stuff in my hair so that her hair it always looks like I had really greasy hair. But it just got me used to it, and it was really baby steps. Like this maturity is a huge thing. So if I was a 5-year-old, she would have treated me like I was a 2-year-old. So, she would play nursery rhymes when we were doing it. She'd have me in front of a TV where I'd be distracted. She would be very understanding of, okay, Maggie needs a 5-minute break before I can go and do her other side of her head, and things like that.
And what about the music?
I was terrible at music, and I think some of it was I'm not deaf, but I just love listening to music way too loud in order for me to just get lost in it. I was a terrible one for literally. I just get lost in the music. It was my escape from reality, from everything of just dancing around my room, listening to music. So I would listen to it way too loud. If it was too quiet, it almost just didn't. I couldn't zone out. So I had to listen to it really loud. Those were days of Walkmans. So I'd be like CD in my hoodie pocket with headphones. So eventually my parents were like, okay, this is clearly something she needs. And they just bought me headphones. They bought me like an MP3 player, a Walkman, where it wasn't going to annoy them, but I could still listen to it as loud as I needed to. The amount of headphones I went through, because I used to break them by dancing and getting caught, was astronomical.
Our foster son has had 3 for Christmas. He got 3 headphones because we knew he'd go through them. So and so can I just point out a useful technique here is, you're obviously being aware. As parents, we would be concerned that it's going to be damaging the eardrums. You can buy headphones that you can limit the volume on as well, and there are many of those out there. You have a look on disability websites as well for headphones. There are various different devices where you can control through an app or something like that the level to which you hear. Okay, so just putting that one out there. Okay, I'm going to come on to another question, if I may. I'm just looking at that. Have you had challenges with that? Okay, yeah, I think we've covered that one. So a couple of thoughts for a comment. Our lad is a very gifted drummer, but stopped suddenly because he was asked to become a lead drummer in the samba band, and he was terrified of making a mistake. He also has secondary addictions. From your own experience or conversations with colleagues, can you offer some insights into this?
Boy, I can definitely talk about. I am a very talented singer. I've had a lot of training, but I would always only ever audition for backgrounds, even though my music teacher, my theater coach would be like, you could go for the main and you would get it. I'm like, nope, not happening. I was far more comfortable being in the choruses. I still got to what I loved, but I wasn't center stage. A lot of it is anxiety and having a fear of, if something goes wrong, if I screw up in front of everyone, everyone's going to know because I'm at the center stage, or it was so much pressure. And I remember I did it one year where I did, and I made part and stuff, and I didn't enjoy it. I hated every minute of it because of the pressure. This wasn't fun for me. This was work. And as soon as it becomes work or stressful, I ended up just being like, nope, sorry, I'm out. Sorry, can't do this. So I think it's an individual's choice of, very often we prefer being in the background where we're not center stage, where we still get to have fun. We can still do what we love, like drumming, but there's no pressure to it.
I know, Maggie May, you and I have, I've told you this story in the past. I used to run this FASD, I used to run an autism band, and the autism band consisted of an array of some of the most spectacular musicians that would never perform in public, but would be in a room, in different places in the room, that had the lighting down, that had the environment just suitable for them, and created some of the best music that nobody would ever hear. And it was a real privilege for me to be a part of that. But I understood the value and the need for them to be in that space. And that was their comfort place. And I think I think what you're expressing there is, we have to stop imposing our expectations on other people. Something that we do a lot, and you help with this, is about reparenting parents. Can you touch a little bit on that? Because some of the questions we've got coming in, I think it sums up a few of those points. It's about how we reparent. When we're educated and understand FASD better, it means that we can learn to parent, putting them at the center. Can you explain that?
Oh yeah. So I'm a foster child, now adopted by my foster parents, but they had 3 biological kids who are all older than me. They hated me for a while because they're like, you get away with things that we never got to get away with. Like, we weren't allowed an MP3 player, and you got one before we were ever allowed one. And so what my parents had to is throw out the parenting book, throw out what they had used on their own kids, because it was never going to work for me. Parent differently to the way their parents taught them. It's really about starting from square one. I'm huge advocate, go on trainings, webinars, but also know your child. Things like, my parents very quickly noticed that they asked me a question, it's not going to sink in at all. And they would often get frustrated and angry because they'd be like, Maggie, we go empty the dishwasher, and 5 minutes later, nothing will have happened. But for me, my brain was processing the instruction, and what they had done was, Maggie, go empty the dishwasher, and then 2 seconds later, Maggie, get up, go do the dishwasher, and that delayed the first instruction into my brain. So then I had to do it all over again, and then they get frustrated, and we'd be shouting back and forth. What they learned was, go ask Maggie to go empty the dishwasher and then walk away. A minute later, once the information had processed into my brain, I would go and empty the dishwasher. But what they had to learn was they had to ask the instruction calmly and then just walk away. But they also had to be very understanding of, okay, the brain it often gets described as Swiss cheese, where sometimes the instruction will just go down a hole and never actually go to where it needs to go. And so they would have to come back. But the key was, don't get frustrated, don't get angry, just ask her again, and hopefully it will sink in this time. But they had to learn all these different new parenting tips. I know my mother was on the phone to people in Germany and Sweden, finding different strategies and techniques that might work. She was contacting other parents and teachers of FASD and just being like, look, this is where Maggie is. She's struggling in the shower. What can we do? How can we make life easier for Maggie? Using was, things like, I wouldn't shower because it was a temperature change. When you get out in the morning, you're nice and warm. You don't want to have to go and get undressed, get cold, and then step into a really nice warm shower, step out, get cold again. One instruction was, just put her clothes on the radiator so they're nice and warm, so that when she gets out of the shower, she's going straight into warm clothing. All of a sudden, there was no meltdowns about me showering. In fact, I was like, yeah, get me in the shower now. I want to get into warm clothes. So it's just really learning out of the box techniques. The one thing is a technique might not work for you this week. Don't throw it out. Try it again next week, because we're always changing. It always depends on where we are, emotionally, sensory, everything. So don't throw it out. It might not work for you this year. Keep it. A year later, try it again. It might work. That's a huge thing that came with organizing. We've tried everything for me to organize my room. We'd label things and that didn't work. Now everything's labeled and it works for me. So it's just keep revisiting techniques that you've used, because again, they might work.
When you're looking at dysmaturity, there is a development within the brain throughout your life, and so therefore you have to understand. I am going to ask you to talk about dysmaturity because one of the questions has come up in here, and can you just explain a little bit about some of your examples of dysmaturity?
Yeah. All right. I love dysmaturity. So a really simple way is you half the age. So I'm 28 officially, but actually my brain works of that of a 16-year-old or 17-year-old in some ways. So I will act like a teenager at occasions. Things like being able to read instructions and follow them. For example, the box says put the pasta in the pot and let it cook for 20 minutes. So what do? I do that, and then I leave the house for 20 minutes. Gas on, pasta's cooking, because, well, I just have to come back in 20 minutes. It doesn't say I have to stay and watch the pot. So I go to the garage and go and get chocolate for myself, come back. Thankfully, I hadn't burnt the house down, but it's things like understanding, comprehending what I'm reading, but actually putting the skills into real life. I have the language skills of a 32-year-old. So it's really, there's no baseline. It's very like this. Things like money management. I have no concept of money. Money is abstract. So I get Maggie, I spend money without even thinking of, oh, I need to pay bills. I need to make sure my cats are fed. It's oh, the latest Switch game came out. I'm going to go and buy that. And all of a sudden my money's gone. And that's where things like putting in support networks of my parents are guardians of my money. They make sure everything gets paid, and whatever's left over is my spending money, and I can spend it on what I like. But it's really difficult because in some ways, in some areas, I'm way above my age. In other areas, I'm so nowhere near my age. So there's no baseline. So the easiest thing is just half the age. Treat them, when I was 10, if I was having a really bad brain day, I couldn't even feed myself. My mom would have to spoon feed me, which is completely normal. If you're a 5-year-old, your mom is still spoon feeding you. So it's just about, in some areas, we will always think of us as that age, so that when you're a 22-year-old having a teenage meltdown, it's not a strange thing. It's okay, they're functioning at a 10-year-old's level. So it is the end of the world if they get their phone confiscated.
And of course, this makes it very difficult when having relationships and friendships with people. So, what's your experience been like with friendships and building up those bonds? I know you've got a vast network of friends now because of the groups that you've socialized with. You're going back out to Seattle soon and be meeting lots of very close friends and dear friends. So tell me a little bit about those relationships, those friendships. We talk about them a lot with our friendship groups at FASD Awareness that you host. So can you touch on that a bit for us, please?
Yeah. Growing up, I had 0 friends. I didn't have friends. Now I do have a group of friends. Funny enough, they all have FASD. Typical. Which in some cases is brilliant because we really understand each other. The thing about friendships is they are exhausting. Like I said earlier, keeping your energy level is so important, and friendships and maintaining friendships can be so exhausting. I did recently make a really good friend at in Edinburgh, so that's also cool. And she doesn't have FASD, so that's even better. But um, with my FASD friends, it's normal for us to message and then all of a sudden not talk for 3 weeks and then jump back online and chat again as if we'd spoken yesterday. There's no judgment. It's okay, Maggie's done this. She needed some time away. She got it, and that's fine. I think it's sometimes parents can push their expectations of if my child only or adult only has one friend, then they're lonely. That one friend might be the best friend that they're going to have until their wedding day, and then when they're in a nursing home together, fighting over the last biscuit. We don't need to be surrounded by people, because very often that's worse for us, because it wears us down, it exhausts us, it makes us not be able to enjoy after school activities or other activities because we're so tired. So it's shifting the perspective of you don't have to be surrounded by 100 people to be happy or to be considered to have a good friendship group. For me, I have about 10 friends, and that's it. And even then, they're at different levels. Of some of them I'll message once in a blue moon, and it's okay. So friendships are difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that is always very interesting is when you have a relationship with when you're in your 20s, and you said about this maturity as well, but you might be thinking of the maturity of a 15-year old, but you might have the awareness of an 8-year-old. So therefore it becomes a very difficult thing to do to maintain and sustain a relationship. And I think it's fascinating when you say it's exhausting, because I think it's exhausting for anybody quite often. But when you have the challenges that you have on a daily basis, can you tell me a little bit about that exhaustion? Because when we do our training, and I'll talk about it tonight as well, if I may, is, what people are seeing you here tonight, what they don't understand is the preparation that has gone into this tonight. That when you do your training, you speak so eloquently. It's all well thought out. I mean, today is a Q&A, so it's put you under intense pressure because you don't know, you haven't been able to prepare for this. And we understand that, don't we? We've spoken
Yeah.
about that, and we've discussed this as well, and we've got strategies in place and coping mechanisms for whatever might come up on the screen tonight and whatever you might feel. But can you tell us what's going to happen tomorrow as a result of today's meeting? What preparation happened earlier? Because I think people get a bit more of an insight when they understand just what is involved in you being here tonight.
Oh yeah. Well, tomorrow's a write-off day for me. If I get out of bed, it's going to be a miracle. Um, I think what people kind of forget is I can do this, and I can talk until the cows come home, but there is an effect of I'm going to be out of commission for at least the next 2 days. Of I'm going to be micro thinking about everything I've said. Oh, I should have said this. I could have said this. Oh, I didn't answer that the way I wanted it. And I will be replaying this whole webinar in my head for the next day and a half of, oh, I messed up, or I should have said this. Preparation, it's like we said, it's a Q&A, so I have no idea what people are going to ask, which I love, by the way. I absolutely love this style of things. But it's also okay, I have a kind of sort of idea of some of the areas that I will be covering. So I'll have to, things like this maturity. So coming up with examples for that, or things like, a lot of self-reflection of what I have to go back into my head of what it was like being a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 16-year-old, or what was I feeling the day I got told I had FASD, or the day I realized I had FASD. When I first started doing this, it was really triggering for me to actually go back to those times, because some of them were not the greatest time in my life. Where I'd be like, oh, oh, oh no. So it used to be very, whereas now I love it because it also just reminds me of how far I've come, where I've come from, and where I've started to become really self-loving of, yeah, I have challenges, but it's okay. But it does leave me of in this place of, yeah, I'm out of commission for the next 2 days. I've already told my parents that no, there's no point even asking me to do any jobs or work around the house or anything tomorrow because nope, if I get up out of bed, it's going to be a miracle. But because I know that I plan ahead, things like upcoming conference in Seattle, I'll make sure I fly out like a week in advance so I get adjusted to the time zone, that I can get enough sleep. Um, Things that my parents know that once I'm back, it's going to take a week for me to get up and running. Things like if it's in person, one day events, meetups, and stuff, I will go the day before. I will pay extra and go the day before so I'm well rested. And then I will stay the day after because I'm going to crash. So I'm now aware of this is the effect. So I just put in preparation plans for that.
And do you feel, the repetition of this has built your confidence? Because one of the questions we had was, what would you say is one of the best interventions for your anxiety over the years? What was one of the best methods of dealing with it?
Um, I talking. I think reminding myself of how far I've come from where I started off. I love doing these kind of things because I get to then do a lot of reflection afterwards. So it's almost therapy for me. But I've also started going to talking therapy, which I I've never had anything against therapy, but I always thought, no, it's not going to work for me. But even just having someone to talk to once a week of this is how my week went, this is what it was like, and just getting it off my chest. And it doesn't have to be a therapist, it could be with a parent of you schedule, hey, we're going to have a coffee morning every Monday and I'm just going to vent to you. I'm just going to get everything off my shoulders. You're not going to say anything. You're just going to listen. Or a friend or a support worker or, anyone. Because I think some of my anxiety was I used to feel like I couldn't talk to anyone about it because they would judge me or they would use it against me or I didn't need people knowing my weaknesses when I already knew I had weaknesses and challenges. So I really think talking about it, doing webinars, advocating, being in support groups where you can just vent. You can just say, look, I'm having a really bad day. This is what happened. I had a meltdown. I was overwhelmed. I stormed out of a store. I just had to dump everything to get out of there. And to have people say, "Oh, I do that. That happens to me too." It's making it okay, but it's also oh, what strategies do you use? Can I try them?
I was
And
going to say
yeah,
this was one of the most fascinating adult friendship group meetings that I recall was when we were talking about anger management in there. It was a conversation, that you one of the attendees wanted to talk about, and they asked the question, and it opened up a fascinating conversation and discussion about how people manage their anger and manage their anxiety and the strategies that they all used. And there was something new for everybody in that conversation, but it was also, I think, at the end everybody was saying how therapeutic it was, how they felt it was quite a cathartic experience talking about it and hearing that somebody else had a similar approach to it as they did. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. I've got we've just come out of Christmas, and I know there must be many parents out there that are bitterly disappointed that these well thought out presents and the plans for Christmas might not have worked in the way that they had hoped. You and I have spoken about Christmas because I mentioned that we had this plan and a strategy because the anxiety and the expectation of Christmas was really causing a lot of conflict to both our young men. And we were giving a present a day before Christmas the build up to Christmas so that there wasn't such an overwhelming array of presents or gifts, or just one simple gift or something like that, and just get it done out the way and eat the chocolate, all of that, get it out the way and done. Then you don't have all this build up. Tell us about Christmases with you and your experience of that, and or a birthday or something similar, an occasion.
Oh, Christmas. I think the way you did it was genius. Gosh, I wish I thought of that.
Taken years.
I know. I think Christmas is really difficult. Especially when you have FASD, because a lot of things comes into expectations. You write your list for Santa, you put all the things, and then you might only get one thing off your list. And then there's the disappointment. You also have things on the list of you thought was going to be so much funner than it actually was. So you play with it once and you don't play with it again. In my case, I prefer to play with the boxes that the gifts came in, and I would build forts and rockets and costumes and robots and everything. I didn't really care about the gifts. And my parents would spend so much money on them, and they could never understand why I'd play with them once or twice, and then I would never play with that toy again. What my parents discovered that in my case, I loved the unwrapping of presents, not so much the presents themselves, but I loved unwrapping. So they just get like loads of like cheap things, but also useful things. I think a huge thing is you play with it once, twice, and then it's clutter. It's more things for you to figure out where to put away and to keep your room tidy with. So, I would get things like bath bombs, which I loved, and shower gels and, practical things that, they're going to run out at some point, and then you get to throw them out and they're not going to be clutter. So sometimes, later on in years, we became a more simple thing of we got 3 gifts, something we wanted, something we needed, and something educational. So I would get a book, something I needed. So it might have been clothes, it might have been shower gels, or just something that would be used, and then something that I wanted. So that was where a Nintendo, a Switch, or even in my case, it was just books, and then something educational. So that might have been an educational book, it could have been an educational DVD, it could have been puzzle books, just things like that. And that worked really well because it cut down on my expectations. It also allowed me to learn of, okay, responsibilities. So, we can't always get what we want. But it also it made me value things more.
Mm. And of course, as Demi has put here, it's a break in the normal routine, which is a real
Awful.
challenge. Yes.
It's awful.
Okay, I'm going to come on to another question. I think this is a really important one that I think you'll be able to answer. Our 15-year-old adopted daughter is far too trusting with people, especially males, and we are extremely worried about her naivety and vulnerability after she leaves the safety of school. She's definitely more like a 7-year-old, and we are really concerned. What can we do to try to support her with preparing her for the transitions to college?
Huge thing is talk to the college themselves. Very often, I was very naive in college and preparing for college and stuff. I had no idea of what the real world was really like because I'd left quite a sheltered life and wrapped up in cotton wool. Talk to the college. Very often they can have someone to keep an eye during college hours. My parents would actually accept me from college, so that there was no risk of me being convinced to go somewhere I shouldn't, or to leave college during hours because a guy suggested it or someone else suggested, hey, let's skip college today and go to my house and go drinking or whatever. So just let the college know because they will often put things in place. It's a very common thing. just talk about it, and you're gonna have to have these conversations over and over and over again. And just, talk about, things like you're older now, guys might be showing interest. What do you do if a guy says this? Or what do you do if someone asks you, do you want to get into their car? And really, it's like you said, half the age. So you're talking to a 7-year-old. So you're giving them life skills of this is what you do, this is what you do not do. If this happens, you call someone or you scream or whatever. And just keep going over and over. And you're going to have this conversation so many times, but repetition, and, just putting safeguards in place would be
Yeah.
my advice.
Absolutely. And I think it's really valuable advice. And again, we come back to this thing that you brought up. I'm glad you did, is this maturity. What age are you talking to them at?
Yeah.
You're not talking to them. And it's not disparaging at all, is it? It's about understanding and having their best intentions at heart. Um, we've got another good question here. From your experience, what are the best ways to encourage our young people with FASD to learn to accept support? And in your experience, how did you transition from accepting support to being able to co-develop support plans with your parents? It's a great question.
That's a great question. That's a whole webinar itself. I think you can't force supports on them. Because we will just rebel. I rebelled against my parents so much. I thought they were just overprotective, wrapping me in cotton wool, were so uncool. I could not, and I just rebelled against them. I'm fine. I don't need your help. I can take care of myself. I can take care of my money. And of course, my bank account would go into negative numbers, and I'd be begging, being like, help. Um, but until that we have fallen and kicked our, gotten ourselves up and made the mistakes and maybe continued to make the mistakes until we realize, okay, actually, I can't do this on my own. Things like my money management. I'd have the bank calling saying, hey, well, you're an overdraft. Or people for credit cards calling me being like, hey, you owe us money. And I would get so overwhelmed and I think, oh, I can handle it on my own. And then it just would get so bad, and then I would go to my parents and we'd have to sort it out together. And that's when I realized, okay, no, money is not my thing at all. So okay, no, I'm going to have to ask for support. And in some ways I've still rebelled against them of, no, I don't need your help on this. I know what I'm doing, and sometimes I'm in the right, sometimes I'm in the wrong. But I think just a key thing is just knowing that they'll be there when things do go wrong as our safety place of going back and being able to say, look, I've messed up. I really need you to help me sort out these forms, or I've missed my application. Can you please ring the university or college or doctor and just explain to them that I need an extra day to do them? But just not judging. Don't be
Yeah.
surprised when we come and we are in financial debt, or we have missed all of our appointments, or we've forgotten to take all of our medications for the last 2 months. Don't judge. Don't be surprised. Just come up with useful solutions.
I was going to say, what is the approach for a parent that obviously they're seeing the frustrations and they're getting really worked up, and they look, I've told you before, we know this doesn't work, but what is the approach for a young lady like you coming through that whole trauma of having to accept that you do need that help? What is the best approach for a parent? You said about not judging, but how should they communicate with you most effectively? What is the best way?
I think, have a discussion, but also don't take control. It's really about both sides talking and coming up with a solution
Yeah.
together. When I feel like my parents are taking control, not listening to what I'm saying because they think they know best, I'm just automatically shutting them out. I'm like, nope, you know what, you go away. Instead, very often we'll talk and I'll be like, this is where I'm coming from. This is where I think I can contribute. And then we'll just talk and we'll go back and forth until we find a solution that works for both of us.
Yeah, you're gonna have a far greater response when it's a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
And what do you suggest at the moment? You know, put them at the center of it. What do you want to get from this? How can we help you? Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. Now, we've got so many comments on here saying this is exactly what my kids like. This is so brilliant. Where can we see it again? Well, I will be posting it alongside all the other YouTube videos from our webinars and our Be Aware campaign, which is on our YouTube channel as well. You can go to our website as well at FASD Awareness .co.uk. .org.uk, I beg your pardon, and go to our website where we do show our webinars on there as well, and they've got links to all of them. And Maggie Mays will, once I've finished editing, it'll probably be up by the end of the weekend. So, you know, a huge thank you as always, Maggie May. Your depth of knowledge and experience and insightful explanations are just so helpful for all our families, and we thank you for that. The final question I've got is that somebody wants a sneak preview about what you're going to talk about at the keynote speech, because you are presenting the keynote speech at the 2025 International Conference in Seattle as the prestigious winner of the coveted Starfish Award from last year. So are you going to give anyone any sneak previews or let them all wait?
Okay. So me and my colleague CJ are doing the opening, and our presentation is Insidia Stigma Through the Elephant's Eyes, or looking something. And it's really talking about how stigma affects us, but also how when you have FASD, you know, how does the stigma influence your growing up? Things that researchers, doctors really need to hear. I will definitely be posting more about it, and I will probably be maybe giving a few sneak peeks while I'm over in Seattle. But yes, it's really stigma based, and how stigma can be damaging, and things like 100% preventable isn't helpful. In fact, it just hinders our ability in raising awareness, and how it has an effect on not just the world around us, but also on people with FASD and their perception of themselves growing up.
Brilliant. The language is everything, isn't it? It really is. Maggie May, thank you so much. Get a good night's sleep now.
Oh, I will.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
And
you.
thank you all for joining us as always to gain even more information on living alongside FASD. And look forward to seeing you next month, where we've got the brilliant Cassie Jackson. So look forward to seeing you then. All the best. Bye.